this journey and gathered together for the purpose of enjoyment and learning. To light the chalice today, I would like to invite my incredible, hot, sexy, and recovering wife, Tess, to come. We have certainly missed her, and it's great to have her back with us. As we light the chalice flame, please open your hymnal and let's sing together hymn number 188, Come, Come, Wherever You Are. Please stand. We also like to recognize visitors that are with us. We love having visitors, and because we live in a vacation destination, we get several. And so we invite you, if this is your first time with us, or if it's been maybe a while since you've been here, to stand, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and possibly what has brought you to visit with us this morning. So if you're a visitor, we invite you to stand at this time. Barbara has a microphone that she'll bring around so that you can introduce yourself. Visitors this morning interested in introducing themselves or others. Here we go.
I'm Mary Watts, and I belong to the UU congregation in Shelter Rock in Manhasset, New York.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm a lifer.
Oh, great. And that's not a sentence, that's a choice, right?
I'm Betsy Redaway. I live in McLean, and I'm visiting my sister who lives in Boynton Beach. And she's friends with Laura and Peter and Frank. And so nice to be down here.
Great, welcome. Really nice to have you today.
Hi, I'm Bobby Potzik, and I'm from the Philadelphia area. We have a place in Jonathan's Landing, and so we pop in once or twice a year.
Well, great.
Sorry we're not more loyal. But...
We like pop-ins. We'll take you whenever you want to come.
Okay, thank you.
In the back corner, we have a few folks I'm familiar with.
This is my family. I'm really blessed that my siblings have come down to visit us this week. They're staying down in Fort Lauderdale, but they graced us with their presence this morning, and I'm really glad. This is Nikki, Vicki, Steve, and Linda. So.
Welcome. Did you get everyone? Excellent. Thank you so much. We also share each week as we repeat our affirmation, which is a reminder of who we are and what our most important values are as we begin. So let's please stand and share in this together. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please be seated. Each week we also come together to share in a quiet time where we invite you to come and light a candle for whatever purpose may be on your mind or on your heart today. We will have a moment of silence where you can spend some quiet time thinking and meditation, praying quietly, and then when the piano plays, you're welcome to come at your own time, at your own pace, to light a candle over here at the table. This is the time during the service when we have an opportunity to share our blessings in financial and gifts of food for the Lake Park Food Pantry. But I also, every once in a while, like to remind you that it's not just money that we need to operate as a congregation. We need your time. We need your person on occasions. And it takes a lot of volunteer work to organize the ministries that we have, to run the different committees, to make a Sunday morning service happen. And so as we come together to give our offering today, I do want you to keep in mind that it's not just the financial offerings that we have, but it's also for the work that needs to be done. We have many things that we have an opportunity to provide for. We're going to be sharing a few announcements at the end of the service as far as upcoming events and other ways that you can serve, so we will share those things then. But at this time, let's have the ushers come forward and collect the offering. For those of you who actually read the order of service, I would like to point out that playing the role of Lynn Tomlinson today was in fact Bob Tomlinson. You wanted to make sure there was no confusion there. So far in 2018, we have spent almost every Sunday exploring our 7 principles. We started the year looking at our 7 principles as a group, and since then we have done a bit of a deep dive into each one individually. For those of you who are visitors or may not be very familiar with Unitarian Universalism quite yet, in the place of doctrine, in the place of a set of beliefs that you have to have, we have 7 principles that we choose to live by voluntarily. These principles guide us in our daily interaction with others, in our daily interaction with the divine, the sense of the divine, in our interaction with the environment and the interdependent web of all things, all creation. And so exploring these is something that has been a great value to me. Today we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into our 4th principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, or as I like to call it, the never-ending quest of intellectual curiosity. It's a very good thing to ask questions. The why is super important to me. Somebody makes a comment, they make an assertion, what's called a truth statement, and you ask the question, why? Why do you believe that? Why is that true? Why is this the case? And you learn how to do a search for that. You learn how to do research. I am very fortunate that I've had a good education in my life. I have a research doctorate. And when I was at the University of Cincinnati, learning how to do research and take way too many statistics classes. My professor did a good job of teaching me how to discern between good sources and bad sources. And I would just like to share with you today that Facebook is a bad source. Just in case there's any doubt, social media is always highly questionable when it comes to sharing information. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. How many times have you heard someone say that they like Unitarian Universalism because you can believe anything you want? Oh, I heard it groan. UU lifers almost always groan at that assertion because it's not true. You cannot believe anything you want. That's not the purpose of Unitarian Universalism. Not if you adhere to this principle anyway, because this principle requires us to search for truth. There are a lot of people who believe lots of different things for ridiculous reasons. They hold opinions that are contrary to fact simply because they want to, simply because they don't want to do the research, they don't want to see the truth, and they surround themselves by like-minded people, and they live in what's called an echo chamber, so that everything they hear is their own belief. And they have reaffirmed over and over and over again their preconceived notions, and they're never challenged on their beliefs. This is contrary to this principle. There's a lot of jokes, a lot of things that I've heard over the past couple of years about how UUs like to argue with one another. I honestly haven't noticed a lot of arguing among this congregation. Maybe we need to do a better job of that. It's not that we don't provide opportunities to argue and debate. Part of the reason that we have so many activities like Teaching Thursdays, like News Hour or News Talk, we have First Friday Film, we've got one coming up this week in fact. We have other opportunities for interaction. So we give you channels for discussion and debate. Sometimes I think that we're too nice to each other. And I'm not trying to say that you have to be mean, but we don't want to disagree with someone because we're afraid that that comes across as not nice. One of the problems that we have in our culture is that we have forgotten how to disagree with one another well. And it's possible to sit around the family table at Thanksgiving, to sit around with friends at a dinner or at an event, and to disagree with one another, and to do that with a smile on your face, to do that with love in your heart, and to do that with all sincerity. It is possible to disagree with people you love, with people you attend church with, and to do that well. This is part of what we learn from this principle. Being a UU is in large part about the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. But far too often we forget about the word search. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But as we search for truth and meaning, it requires us to be active. Search is an active verb. You cannot simply choose to believe something and then never more try to find out more information about that. Our fourth principle challenges us to an active intellectual life as we encourage each other to spiritual growth. This means that as we actively search for truth, sometimes we face uncertainty and vehement, honest disagreement. Just one example from the past week. We've seen a lot of debate about arming school teachers as a way to save lives in a mass school shooting event. And while I understand the theory behind a good guy with a gun will stop a bad guy with a gun, statistics and research indicate that that's simply not true. We can think of many examples where well-trained armed people have been overtaken by someone with a plan who has then created a chaotic situation and has killed many. You might remember the movie from a few years ago, American Sniper, based on the true life story of a Navy SEAL named Chris Kyle. Has the record for the most sniper shots in the history of the Navy. He's a well-trained, large, very physically fit individual. He was killed by someone that he knew was a threat. This person caught him at a moment where he was able to overtake Chris and shoot and kill Chris with his own gun. You think about shootings that have happened at military bases like Fort Hood, where someone was able to come on the base and in a whole base full of people who are well armed and well trained still kill many individuals. Even trained police officers only hit their targets about 15 to 18% of the time in a firefight. To think that we can give school teachers guns and provide them with a few hours of training and that they would be well suited to protect students and not turn into a tragedy is misguided at best. I do, by the way, want to arm school teachers, however. But I want to arm teachers with current, well-written textbooks with amazing and creative teaching ideas. I want to arm teachers with enough professional development money to attend conferences and network with other professionals from whom they can learn and with whom they can share. I want to arm teachers with enough classroom time to actually teach instead of having to focus on phony standardized tests and bureaucratic paperwork. I want to arm teachers, but this is not a political rally. Appreciate the encouragement. I want to arm teachers with parents who care, who cooperate, and who volunteer daily to assist in whatever way is necessary. I want to arm teachers with whatever supplies they need to teach well and engage students for active learning. I want to arm teachers with supportive administrators and encouraging colleagues. I want to arm teachers with high expectations and meaningful evaluations. I want to arm teachers with a community that understands how important and indispensable they are. And I want to arm teachers with a livable wage that reflects their importance and responsibility in our society. Damn right I want to arm teachers. But not with guns. With more resources to help them to be effective educators. As we move on and talk more about this principle, my brain works in a way that likes to parse information. So I want to parse some of the words, some of the components of this principle and talk about them individually for a few moments. Again, the principle is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It's the principle of intellectual curiosity. Let's think about the word free. What do we as you mean in this context when we use the word free? We do talk about individual freedom, not encumbered by anyone else's expectations or requirements. I know that a lot of you, like me, have come to UUism after first being part of other religions. My own experience is one where freedom is talked about lightly and not very honestly. Where freedom means here's a list of doctrinal beliefs that you must agree to in order to be one of us. There's a litmus test, there's a standard, there's a box into which you must fit. That is the opposite of intellectual freedom that we value so much as UUs. This free search requires you and invites you to work on your own independently to reach a point of believing, because of this intellectual work, because of this intellectual endeavor, to come to the point where you believe what you do. And you may get to the point where you believe something different than everyone else in here. But if you have had honest intellectual interaction and research to reach that point, then we cheer you the whole way. In fact, I enjoy sitting down with many of you, hearing about your journey, the things that you've learned, the conclusions that you've reached because of the reading and the research that you've done. I had lunch with one of our pagan friends earlier this week. And I said, tell me about the seminal writings of paganism. Who are the authors? Who are the thinkers in paganism that you value highly? So he listed a couple of authors from whom he has learned quite a bit. They're mostly modern authors, though, and we then kind of shared the fact that it was too bad that more modern pagans don't reach back into history, because there are some ancient writings about paganism that have some very fascinating thoughts that could inform some of our societal issues today. But I valued that conversation because he is on a free journey where he is searching for truth and reading and researching and talking with others in order to do that. Then we have the word responsible. The concept of responsibility is tied to duty. It is an obligation to do what you have agreed to do to the best of your ability. It does not allow you to stop growing or to turn off your brain. If we have a responsibility to do something, that is a long-term process. The responsibility of learning, the responsibility of pursuing intellectual curiosity means that we have an obligation. Whenever we are a part of a UU congregation, this responsibility to search for meaning draws us to one another. It draws us to our time together on Sundays. It draws us to activity. It draws us into conversations with one another from whom we can learn. It doesn't mean that we can just come passively and sit down and have a social hour and go on with our lives as if nothing else mattered. As I prepared this message, I was reading a lot from other UU ministers who have delivered similar messages on the 7 principles, who have written about them, and I read a lot of lamenting from UU leaders about how many in our congregations simply seem to come and gather on Sunday mornings and they're not pursuing intellectual curiosity anymore. They're not pursuing social action. They're not pursuing their own sense of meaning in their life. And they were lamenting about how that goes so much against the history of Unitarian Universalism. And when you look at who this denomination was back in the 60s, it wasn't just the search for intellectual meaning that mattered, but that search led to an incredible amount of social activism. If you happen to follow the UUA, that's our international denominational headquarters that's in Boston, you'll read about or you'll see video footage or pictures of many of our leaders going to events, participating in demonstrations, interacting with people from different faiths, trying to continue to make a difference because they are still pursuing intellectual truth and meaning. The obligation that we have comes out of this term responsible. It also means that it has to be intellectually honest. A responsible search is not the same as an irresponsible search, if you want to use kind of an opposite meaning. There are ways to be irresponsible looking for intellectual meaning. You can look in places that are not the right places to get information. You can talk to the wrong people. You can participate in the wrong events. You can have the wrong attitude about your responsibility. And so not all sources of information are equal. We can talk about mainstream media, we can talk about books, we can talk about speakers, we can talk about a lot of different sources of information. But part of the value of being a congregation, of being together, is to be able to share with each other and say, I was reading this book and I got a lot from it. I was gathering together with this group and we had a great discussion about the meaning of life. And to have someone say, well, let's take a look at that author, see what her background is, to see what the research is that comes out of this. Over the past couple of months, and even before that, Tess and I have had a lot of conversations about the medical protocols that she's now under as she continues to recover from her pancreas transplant. There's a lot of research about transplant patients, about what it's taken for them to do well, how to make sure that the organ thrives, that the patient continues to live a healthy life. There's a lot of anti-rejection medications. There's a lot of doctors with different opinions. She and I both have enough education that we know how to find research articles on just about anything. And so she's part of a support group that's on social media for people that have also had similar type of transplants. And sometimes in those groups, people will share an opinion out of ignorance, or I heard from someone that this is true. And so the responsible thing to do is to check that source for validity. The responsible thing to do when you see a meme on Facebook that makes a bold statement is to check that source for validity. The responsible thing to do when you're reading the news on the internet or you're watching your favorite media outlet and someone makes a bold statement or makes a statement of opinion, then you check the source for truth, for veracity. That is the responsible search for truth and meaning, rather than simply accepting what somebody says because it already happens to confirm your preconceived ideas. The word search, as I mentioned before, is an active pledge. You cannot search passively. They are mutually exclusive ideas. You cannot search by simply accepting what others say. You cannot search by not caring. You cannot search by giving up, saying, I'll never know what the truth is. I'll never know what the best path is, so I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to give up. Again, the idea of search requires intellectual curiosity. It encourages us to always ask the why question. Why is this true? Why do you believe that? How do you know this to be the case? Where can I find more information? You know, growing up, I used to go to a place called the library. And in this place called the library, there were these series of books called encyclopedias. Anybody remember encyclopedias? And I could find a lot of information in the encyclopedia. But I could also find a lot of information in this fun little container cabinet that had little drawers called the card catalog. Remember the card catalog? Admittedly, I am more than a little bit of a geek, and I love spending time at the library, reading things in the encyclopedia, trying to use the card catalog to find the best resources of information. But I remember when personal computers started to become popular in the home, and Microsoft created Windows, which came preloaded on these computers, and there was a computer-based encyclopedia set that came on CD-ROM with those computers. Remember the name of that? Encarta. Yeah, who said Encarta? All right, bonus points. If I had brownies to give out, I would absolutely give you a brownie, Carl, but I'm out of brownie. I don't have buttons. I don't have a smiley face sticker. So, yeah, Encarta. And I remember how cool Encarta was, because at the home screen, you could type in a search term and it would bring up related articles to that search term. That was geek heaven, wasn't it? Eventually we lost our card catalogs, and I'm not even sure why students or people go to the library anymore. Because we have become so lazily reliant on the internet. And granted, there's so much on the internet. But it takes a lot of work to search for the truth on the internet. Anybody can create their own web page, called a blog, and just spew their own ridiculous opinion. So we have to be careful by having intellectual curiosity and continuing to ask the why question as we search for truth. What is truth? Truth is the goal. Truth is what we're looking for. Truth with a capital T, truth with a lowercase t sometimes. The search for truth, for me and I hope for you, is a never-ending quest. I do believe that there's such a thing as absolute truth. And I do believe that in some cases that absolute truth is knowable. In some cases, that absolute truth may not be knowable. And I do believe that there are times and there are situations in which truth may be relative to who you are, to your perspective, to your experience. When I was in ministry with evangelical churches, the idea of relative truth was one that was an anathema. All truth was absolute. Which is why they were so sure, they are so sure, that they had God all figured out. And the more I searched, the more I read, the more I learned about God myself, the more I came to the conclusion that that is an insanely arrogant position to have. Because if there is a God that exists, and the answer to that question is an absolute truth. Personally, I believe it's unknowable absolute truth. I believe the intellectually honest stance to take on the existence of God is agnosticism. We can have our own experiences, and we say, my experience leads me to believe that God exists, or my experience leads me to believe that God does not exist. But what we can know of truth, we can prove somehow through some variation of the scientific method. We can test it, we can retest it, we can look at it, we can use our physical senses to smell it, to see it, to taste it, to touch it, to hear it, over and over and over again. But God, by nature, is a metaphysical idea, not a physical one. Metaphysical ideas cannot be tested or proven in a laboratory. I personally believe that the metaphysical world exists. And my biggest example of that is love. How do I know that Tess loves me? Because she told me, because she writes it down, because of the way she treats me, because of the nature of our relationship, because I feel all warm and fluttery inside when we're together. I can pay someone to do all those things. Somebody can fake every single one of those things. Some of you maybe have been in relationships where someone has been faking all of those things. Let's not go there. I believe that love is real. I believe that Tess is in love with me romantically, that our relationship is strong because of the love we have. Can I prove that in the laboratory? Absolutely not. What I can do, though, is get an MRI that shows an area of the brain that lights up when I see a picture of her. That just proves that when I see a picture of her, my brain goes, hubba hubba. Doesn't prove love. So truth sometimes is absolute. Sometimes it's truth with a capital T. Sometimes it's truth with a lowercase t. Many of you have probably seen the picture, and if we had a projector here and a screen, I would be showing you an example of this. You've seen the picture of two people looking at an image from different perspectives. One person sees the letter C. The other person sees the letter E. What they're looking at is created in such a way that if you're looking at it from one angle, you see the letter C. You cannot see the letter E. It's the opposite for the other person. So what is the absolute truth of that situation? The truth of that situation is relative to the perspective of the person looking at that object. As UUs, we recognize the existence of relative truth. We also have to learn how to fact check ideas. Conspiracy theories, memes that we see on Facebook, opinions that we hear by people on the news or friends or family. There are reliable sources to go to. Honestly, I'm a fan of a website called Snopes.com, S-N-O-P-E-S. Now, it's not flawless. Snopes has made mistakes, but it is an incredible database of information. They have a huge team of people that do a lot of research to try to find the truth of an assertion or an idea that has been purported in some way, shape, or form. There's also a website called factcheck.com. Most of your major media outlets have fact checkers, and they have a fact check page on their website. If a president gives a speech, if there's a debate among politicians, they will do fact checks to see if that person is telling the truth. Now you have to be careful because depending upon the source of the fact check, they won't look up every fact statement or truth claim that that person makes. If the media outlet tends to be in favor of the person speaking, they will fact check the things that that person said that they can show are true, while conveniently leaving out the things that may not be true or that are misleading. That's why looking at more than one source is important. I learned when I was doing my doctorate that is called triangulating the data. That's a super cool term, huh? So I like to triangulate my data as I try to figure out the truth of a situation. And ultimately, what are we looking for? Why are we searching for truth? It's because we're looking for meaning. The meaning of life. Why am I here? It's the ultimate existential question that many of us wrestle with on a regular basis. What is my purpose for being? I believe that some of us have a specific purpose in life, and we find that, and we have that sense of calling, and that calling relentlessly bangs us until we decide to respond to it. Some of us are so afraid of that calling, of that purpose, that we push it deep down within us, and so until we hit a point where we can no longer listen to that calling in our life, that we are deaf to it. Some of us have a very general sense of calling. I want to help people